The video is grainy because I bought the cheapest camera they had, the little kind you hide on a shelf, and for the first 40 seconds, nothing happens. Just our living room in the middle of the afternoon, the light coming in sideways through the blinds, the couch we still owed money on, the quiet of a house where nobody's supposed to be home. I remember I almost closed the app. I'd been telling myself for 2 weeks that I was imagining things, that I was tired, that a married woman shouldn't be watching her own front door on her phone like a stranger. And then the door opened. She didn't knock. She didn't call out. My mother-in-law walked into my house the way you walk into a room that already belongs to you, slow and easy, keys still in her hand, and she pushed the door shut behind her with her hip, like she'd done it 100 times. Because she had. That was the part that took the air out of me before I even understood what I was looking at. Not that she was there, that she was so comfortable being there. She set her purse on my kitchen counter. She looked at the mail on the table and she picked it up, and she went through it, one envelope at a time, holding a couple up to the window. Then she walked down the hall, past the bathroom, straight to our bedroom, like her feet already knew the way. And I sat there on the edge of my own bed at 11 at night, watching a woman I'd called family for 6 years open the bottom drawer of my nightstand, the private one, the one even my husband knocked before opening, and start going through the things inside it with her bare hands. My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 38. And until that night, I would have told you I had an ordinary life in an ordinary neighborhood on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. My husband Daniel and I both left for work a little after 7 every morning. He fixed medical equipment at the hospital across town. I did the books for a dental office 10 minutes from our house. We had a small brick place with a maple tree out front that dropped leaves all over the gutters, and a mortgage, and a plan to start trying for a baby the following spring. That was my life. That was the whole thing. And I need you to understand that I loved his mother. I want to be honest about that before I tell you the rest, because it matters. Her name is Carol, and for years she was the closest thing I had to my own mom, who passed when I was 26. Carol taught me how she made her pot roast. She sat with me in the hospital when I had my gallbladder out. She was at every holiday, every birthday, the first one to show up and the last one to leave. If you'd asked me a month before that night whether Carol Brooks would ever hurt me, I'd have laughed. I'd have said she was the reason I felt safe. That's what made it so hard to name what was happening. It didn't come at me all at once. It came in little things, the kind of things you talk yourself out of. A framed photo turned a few degrees the wrong way, a drawer that didn't sit flush when I always closed it flush. Daniel's shirts folded a different way than I fold them, sitting in the laundry basket I'd left half done. The smell of a perfume in our bedroom that wasn't mine, faint, gone by evening, back again a few days later. For 2 weeks, I walked around my own home feeling like a guest, and I couldn't have told you why. And I started to wonder if the problem was me. If you've ever had that feeling, that quiet certainty that something is wrong in a place that's supposed to be yours, and everyone around you acts like you're overreacting, then you already know how lonely it is. That's really why I want to tell this whole story from the beginning, the honest way, nothing left out. And if stories like this move you, stories about real people and the things that happen behind ordinary front doors, do me a small favor and hit like and subscribe, because I've got more of them, and I'd rather tell them to people who actually get it. Because here's the thing I didn't know yet, sitting on my bed at 11 at night with that video playing, what she was looking for in that drawer, what she'd already found, what she was writing down and handing to my husband behind my back, and the question that would end up costing me more sleep than any of it. When Daniel finally saw what his mother had been doing, whose side was he going to take? Let me back up, because if I start with the camera, you'll think I'm the kind of person who spies on family, and I wasn't. I need you to see how I got there, one small strange thing at a time, the way it actually happened. It started with a coffee mug. I know how that sounds, but I'm particular about a few things, and my mugs are one of them because they were my mother's. A set of 6 with little blue flowers around the rim, and after she died, they became the closest thing I had to her hands. I keep them handle out on the second shelf, all facing the same way, and I never think about it. The way you never think about your own habits until one of them is broken. One Tuesday, I came home from work, and one mug was turned the wrong way. Handle in. I stood there in my kitchen with my keys still in my hand, and I felt something cold go down the back of my neck, and then I told myself I was being ridiculous. Daniel must have used it. I'd bumped it. Something. You do that, you know? You find the boring explanation and you hold on to it because the boring explanation lets you keep your afternoon. But here's the thing about Carol, and this is where the past starts bleeding into all of it. Carol was the one who taught me to keep those mugs facing out. 6 years back, the first time she came to our apartment, she opened my cabinet to help me put away dishes, and she lined every mug up the same way without a word. And she caught me watching, and she smiled and said, "A home feels calmer when the little things agree with each other." And I loved that. I was 26, and I'd just lost my mother, and here was this warm, capable woman folding herself into my life, showing me how to make a house feel like a home. I told Daniel that night that his mom was a gift. I meant it with my whole chest. You have to understand what she was to me, because it's the only way the rest of this makes sense. My mom got sick fast and was gone before I'd finished being a daughter, and Carol stepped into that empty space so gently that I never felt her step. She called on Sunday nights. She remembered that I hate cilantro and love the burnt edges of the lasagna. When I had my gallbladder out, she sat in that plastic hospital chair for 9 hours and was holding my hand when I woke up. And Daniel told me later she'd refused to leave even when the nurses tried to send her home. I cried when he told me that. For years, if you had asked me to name the safest person in my life outside my husband, I wouldn't have hesitated. I'd have said Carol. So when the mug was turned the wrong way, the last thing in the world I was going to think was Carol. Carol had a key, sure, but she had a key the way trusted family has a key. For emergencies, for the time we were in Michigan and she watered the plants. That's normal. That's love. That's what I told myself. Then it was the mail. About a week after the mug, I came home and the stack on the table was squared up too neat. Daniel drops the mail in a lazy pile. I'm the one who squares it. And it was squared, and I hadn't done it, and Daniel swore he hadn't touched it. I remember standing there flipping through it, bank envelope, electric bill, a card from my aunt, and every single piece was there, nothing missing, and somehow that made it worse. Because if something had been stolen, I'd have known what I was dealing with. Instead, I had a house that was subtly, patiently rearranged around me, and no proof, and no crime, and a growing certainty that I was losing my grip. I want to be fair to Daniel here, because he's going to look bad later and he doesn't deserve all of it. When I brought these things to him, he wasn't cruel. He was tired, and he loved his mother, and he did what a lot of good people do when you hand them something that would blow up their whole world if it were true. He looked for the small explanation. Nat, you probably moved it yourself. You've been stressed, babe. Why would my mom come over and turn a mug around? And the awful part is, those are reasonable questions. That's what made me start to fold. When the person you trust most gently suggests you're imagining it, you begin to imagine that you're imagining it. There was a night around then that I keep coming back to. We had Carol over for dinner, the 3 of us, pot roast, her recipe, and it was warm and good and normal, and at one point she got up to use the bathroom and was gone a little long, and I heard, or thought I heard, a drawer in our bedroom slide open and shut. When she came back to the table, she was smiling, and she reached over and squeezed my hand and said, "You look tired, honey. Is Daniel helping enough around here? And Daniel laughed, and I laughed, and the moment passed. But I sat there for the rest of dinner with my own hand feeling strange where she'd touched it, and I couldn't tell you why, and that not knowing was starting to make me feel a little crazy. Then came the perfume. Ours is not a big house, and our bedroom is at the end of the hall, and it holds smells, the way small rooms do. And I started noticing, some afternoons, a perfume in there that wasn't mine. Powdery, old-fashioned, roses, and something underneath. Gone by night, back a few days later. I knew that perfume. I'd smelled it 100 times across a holiday table. It was Carol's. And the first time I let myself actually think the word, actually think Carol has been in our bedroom in the middle of the day, I sat down on the edge of the bed because my legs didn't feel like holding me. And then, right on cue, the other voice. You're spiraling, Natalie. She's the woman who held your hand in the hospital. Listen to yourself. That's the trap. And I fell all the way into it. For 2 weeks, I lived between those two voices, one telling me something was deeply wrong in my own home, the other telling me I was becoming the kind of woman who accuses the person who loves her. I lost weight. I stopped sleeping right. And I finally understood I couldn't live inside that question anymore. I needed to know, one way or the other, even if knowing broke something. So on a Thursday, on my lunch break, not telling Daniel, I drove to the electronics store on Hamilton Road and I bought the cheapest little camera they had. I hid the camera on the bookshelf in the living room, tucked behind a row of paperbacks with just the lens peeking through, angled at the front door and most of the room. It took me 20 minutes of moving it an inch at a time, and the whole while my hands were shaking, because part of me was praying it would catch nothing. That's the truth. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to watch 3 days of an empty house and finally believe Daniel. Finally believe I'd been tired and grieving and seeing ghosts, and go back to being the woman who thought her mother-in-law hung the moon. The first day, nothing. I checked it on my phone in the office bathroom around 2, heart going, and there was just our living room, still and sunlit, the mail untouched. I almost laughed with relief. I texted Daniel a heart for no reason, and he sent one back, and I thought, okay, maybe I'm getting better. The second day was a Wednesday. I'll remember it was a Wednesday for the rest of my life. I was at my desk after lunch, and I opened the app more out of habit than fear. And there she was. Carol let herself in at 1:14 in the afternoon. I know the exact time because I've watched it more times than I'll admit. She came in with her own key, no hesitation, and she shut the door behind her and stood in my living room for a moment with her eyes closed, breathing, like a woman coming home to a place she'd missed. Then she set her purse on the counter and she went to the mail. I watched my mother-in-law go through my mail one envelope at a time. She held the bank statement up to the window and looked at it for a long moment. She opened the card from my aunt, read it, put it back, and then she took her phone out of her purse and she photographed the bank statement, 2 pages, turning it over with one finger, careful, unhurried, the way you'd document something you meant to keep. And I sat in that office bathroom with my hand over my mouth, because this wasn't a mug turned the wrong way anymore. This was a woman building a file. Here's what breaks my heart even now, looking back. There was a version of Carol I'd built over 6 years, and she was real to me, and I watched her die on a phone screen in a 2-inch square. Because at the same time I was seeing this, my mind was throwing up every memory I had of her, and every one of them was quietly changing shape. I thought about our wedding. Carol had insisted on helping plan it, and I'd been grateful, motherless bride that I was, so thankful for a woman who wanted to sit with me over seating charts. But I remembered now how every choice had slowly become hers, how the venue I loved was talked down as impractical until I let it go, how she'd say, Daniel would want it this way, and I'd fold. because who was I to know what Daniel wanted better than the woman who raised him? At the time, it felt like love. Watching her photograph my bank statement, it started to feel like the first chapter of something. I thought about the key. When we bought the house, Carol asked for a key, just in case. And of course, we said yes, because that's what you do. And Daniel's whole family had always treated doors as suggestions. But I remembered, sharp and sudden, a thing she'd said at the closing dinner, laughing, wine in her hand. She'd said, "A mother never really stops having a key to her son's life." And everybody chuckled, and I chuckled, because it was a sweet thing a proud mom says. I wasn't laughing anymore. That night, I didn't tell Daniel. I know some of you will judge me for that, and that's fair, but try to understand where I was. I had one clip. One. And I knew exactly what would happen if I showed my husband a single video of his mother going through the mail. He'd say she was checking if a bill was overdue. He'd say she photographed the statement because she wanted to help us with money, which she'd offered before. He'd find the small explanation, because the big one was unthinkable. And then he'd look at me differently, like I was a wife who set a trap for his mother. I wasn't ready to be looked at like that. Not over one clip. So I made a decision that I still turn over at night. I left the camera up. I decided to let her show me the whole thing. And she did. Over the next week and a half, Carol came into my house 4 more times, always in the early afternoon, always alone. I stopped sleeping. I'd lie next to Daniel in the dark. In the bedroom I now knew she stood in, and I'd wait until his breathing went slow and even. And then I'd take my phone under the blanket and watch what his mother had done that day. It was the loneliest I have ever been in my life, and I was lying 6 inches from the man I'd promised to share everything with. Because it kept getting worse. It was never just the mail again. One afternoon, she went down the hall to our bedroom and was in there for nearly 20 minutes. And though the camera couldn't see inside, I could see her come back out with something small and white in her hand that she tucked into her purse. Another day, she stood at our kitchen counter writing on a notepad, our notepad, tearing off a page and folding it and setting it somewhere I couldn't see. And I spent that entire evening pretending to watch television while my eyes crawled over every surface of my own living room looking for a folded piece of paper. And then there was the afternoon she brought a second person. I need to be careful how I say this, because I still don't have every answer. But on the 9th day, Carol let herself in and, a few minutes later, held the door open for another woman I didn't recognize, older, in a cardigan, carrying a tote bag. The two of them stood in my living room and talked, and Carol gestured around the house, at the couch, down the hall toward the bedroom, the way you'd give someone a tour, or the way you'd walk someone through a plan. They were in my house for over an hour, and when they left, Carol locked my door behind them with her key, gentle as anything, and I sat frozen at my desk 2 miles away and realized I had no idea how deep this went, or how long it had been going on, or who else knew about a life I thought was only mine and Daniel's. That was the night I stopped asking whether I was imagining it. The new question was so much heavier. Now I had to figure out how to show the man I loved that his mother had been living a secret life inside our marriage, and pray he'd believe me before she got to him first. I found the first note 4 days later, and I wasn't even looking for it. I was cleaning out the console table by the front door, the little drawer where we throw takeout menus and spare batteries, and my fingers touched a folded piece of paper wedged under the tray. Lined paper, torn from a notepad. I knew before I opened it. I stood there in the hallway and unfolded it and read my mother-in-law's handwriting, that neat looping cursive I'd seen on birthday cards for 6 years, and the floor tilted a little under me. It was a note to Daniel. Not to me, to Daniel. It said, and I'm giving you this close to word for word because I read it enough times to memorize it, Danny. A wife who keeps her own accounts is a wife keeping her own exits. You deserve to know what's really yours before it's too late. Come by Thursday, don't mention it to her. Mom. And under that, a little heart. The same little heart she drew on every card she'd ever given me. I sat down right there on the hardwood floor of my own hallway, because this wasn't a woman being nosy. Nosy I could have understood, almost forgiven. This was a woman running a quiet campaign to convince her son that his wife was hiding money, hiding intentions, hiding an escape route, and she was doing it in secret, in his ear, over months maybe, in a language built to make him afraid of me. And I finally understood the thing I'd been circling for weeks without letting myself see it. The mail, the statements, the drawers. It was never about information. It was about a story. She was assembling a story about me to hand to my husband, and I had no idea how much of it he'd already swallowed. Because here's what I hadn't wanted to admit. Daniel had been different for a while. Nothing you could point at. But he'd started asking small questions that sat wrong. One night, out of nowhere, "Hey, why do you keep your savings separate again?" I'd had that account since before we met. It was just mine, the way a lot of people have. But the way he asked, careful, like he'd been coached to ask, made my stomach drop. And now I knew why. Another time he mentioned, too casually, that Mom worried I seemed distant lately. Distant. I'd been distant because I was lying awake watching his mother rifle through our lives, but of course I couldn't say that. So I'd just gotten quieter, which fed her story perfectly. She'd built a trap where every true thing I did looked like proof of the lie. That's the part I want you to sit with, because it's the cruelest part. She didn't just invade my home. She used my own reactions against me. The more scared and withdrawn I got, the more I looked like the secretive wife she was describing. I was helping her without meaning to. And Daniel, my good, tired, mother-loving husband, was standing in the middle with two women he trusted telling him two different stories, and only one of us knew there was a camera. The flashback stopped being sweet after that. I couldn't look at a single memory of Carol without seeing the machinery underneath. The Sunday phone calls I'd found so warm, I now understood were also how she kept a channel open, always current on our lives, our money, our plans. The hospital, her 9 hours in that chair, the story that made me cry. I even started to wonder about that. And then I hated myself for wondering, because maybe it was real, maybe she did love me once. And that was almost worse. That's the thing nobody tells you about this kind of betrayal. It doesn't just hurt going forward. It reaches backward and poisons every good thing you thought you had, until you can't trust your own gratitude. I hid the note. I photographed it, put it back exactly where I'd found it because some instinct told me not to tip her off, and I started watching Daniel the way I'd been watching the camera. And what I saw scared me. There was a distance in him now, small silences, a way he'd look at me and then look away like he was carrying something. I told myself he was just tired, but I knew. Thursday was coming, the Thursday from the note, and I knew he was going to his mother's, and I knew what she'd have waiting for him. The photographed statements, her version, maybe more notes. She was going to sit my husband down and lay out the case against his own wife, and I was running out of time to get there first. I want to tell you I handled it well. I didn't. That week was the lowest I've ever been. I'd go to work and stare at numbers I couldn't add. I stopped eating almost entirely. There was one night I stood in our bedroom, in the room she'd been standing in, and I looked at our bed and our photos and the gallbladder scar in the mirror that she'd sat beside me through, and I felt like a guest in a museum of my own marriage, like none of it had ever really been mine, like she'd owned it the whole time and just let me decorate. I called in sick the next day and sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot for 2 hours because I couldn't make myself go home to a house that didn't feel like mine. And somewhere in that parking lot, something in me turned. I'm not a dramatic person, I really am not. But I remember the exact moment the fear started curdling into something harder. I thought about my mother and how she'd raised me to be soft, and how that softness had let all of this happen to me. And I thought, very clearly, in a calm that scared me a little, this is my home. This is my marriage. I chose Daniel, and Daniel chose me, and no one, not his mother, not anyone, gets to walk through my front door with a copied key and rewrite my life while I'm at work. Being family doesn't buy you a key to the inside of two people's marriage. I'd spent 6 years so grateful for a mother that I never noticed I'd handed her the deed to my whole life. I wanted it back. So I stopped waiting to be believed, and I started building something she couldn't argue with. I pulled every clip off the camera and I organized them by date. I photographed the note again in better light. I wrote down times, the afternoon with the second woman, the 20 minutes in the bedroom, everything. I made it a file, the same way she'd been making a file on me, except mine was true and mine was recorded. And I made a decision about Thursday. I wasn't going to let Daniel walk into his mother's house and hear her story with no defense. I was going to show him everything the night before, all of it, and let my husband see with his own eyes what love had been doing to us behind a locked door. I just didn't know yet whether he'd look at that screen and finally see his mother, or look at me and see a wife who'd put a camera in their home. I told him on Wednesday night, the night before the Thursday, in the note. I waited until the dishes were done and the house was quiet, and I asked him to sit with me at the kitchen table, and I could see in his face that he thought this was going to be a conversation about us, about the distance, and part of him looked almost relieved that I was finally bringing it up. Then I put my phone on the table between us and I said, "Before you say anything, I need you to just watch. Please." All the way through. I played him the Wednesday clip first. Carol coming in at 1:14 with her key, going through the mail, photographing the bank statement page by page. I watched my husband's face the whole time instead of the screen because I already knew the screen by heart, and what I saw was a man trying very hard to keep the small explanation alive. "She was probably checking a bill," he said, but his voice didn't have any floor under it. I didn't argue. I just swiped to the next clip. And the next. The 20 minutes down the hall. The notepad. The afternoon she brought the stranger and gave her a tour of our home. Daniel stopped talking. He stopped making the small explanations. He just watched, and his jaw got tight, and his eyes started doing something I'd never seen them do in 6 years. And then I unfolded the note and I put it in his hands. I've thought a lot about what I expected him to do in that moment. And the honest answer is, I didn't know. And that not knowing had been eating me alive for weeks. Because there's a version of that night where Daniel reads his mother's handwriting telling him to hide things from his wife, and he still finds a way to defend her. Where the pull of the woman who raised him is stronger than the woman he married. I'd braced for it. I'd half convinced myself it was coming. And for a few seconds, it looked like it might. He read the note, and the first thing out of his mouth was, "There's got to be a reason. My mom wouldn't..." "Nat, this is my mother." And something in me just went cold and quiet, because there it was, the thing I'd feared. Him reaching for her even now, even holding the proof in his own 2 hands. I remember I didn't cry. I was past crying. I just said, very softly, "Daniel." She copied our key. She's been in our bedroom. She wrote that down and hid it from me in our own house. If a stranger did this, you'd have called the police an hour ago. The only reason you haven't is that you love her. And she counted on that. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked back down at the note, at the little heart she'd drawn under it. The same heart from every card. And I watched something break in his face and rearrange. He put the note down on the table very carefully, like it might go off. And he said, in a voice I'd never heard from him, "How long has this been happening?" And I told him. All of it. The mugs, the perfume, the weeks of not sleeping, the parking lot. And my husband put his face in his hands at our kitchen table and said, "Oh my God, you've been carrying this alone. You thought I wouldn't believe you." And that was the moment the marriage came back to me. Not when he got angry at her, when he grieved for me. We didn't sleep that night. We sat up and we went through every clip together. And Daniel got quieter and colder the more he saw. And somewhere around 2 in the morning, he told me things I hadn't known. That his mother had been calling him at work. That she'd told him, weeks ago, that she was worried about money going missing, and that I seemed secretive. That she'd planted, drop by drop, exactly the fear the note was built to harvest. He'd been carrying his own confusion for months, and she'd been feeding it, and neither of us had known the other was drowning in the same room. The question of the police was mine, not his, and I want to be honest that Daniel flinched at it. His first instinct was to handle it in the family, to drive over there Thursday like she wanted and have it out, keep it private. And I understood that. But I'd learned something in those weeks in the dark. Private is exactly what had let it happen. Private is what a copied key is for. I told him I wasn't going to sit across a table and let her explain it away and turn it into my word against hers and be the hysterical wife again. There was a record now. There was a folded note in her handwriting telling my husband to deceive me. I wanted it documented by someone whose job it was to write things down, so that whatever happened next, no one could ever tell me again that I'd imagined it. So on Thursday morning, instead of Daniel driving to his mother's, we drove to the police station together. I brought the file, the clips, organized by date, the photographed note, the times, the stranger, the 20 minutes behind a door that was supposed to be ours alone. And I sat in a small room with fluorescent lights and slid my phone across the table to an officer and heard myself say the sentence I never in my life thought I'd say, that my mother-in-law had made a copy of our house key and had been letting herself into our home while we were at work. Saying it out loud to a stranger with a badge did something I didn't expect. For weeks, I'd been so afraid of being dramatic, of overreacting, of being the crazy one. And this officer just listened and took notes and watched 2 of the clips and then looked up at me and said, plainly, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, "Ma'am, she does not have permission to be in your home. This is a crime." 6 words. This is a crime. And I felt something in my chest that had been clenched for 2 months finally let go, because someone with no reason to love me or her had looked at the same thing I'd been seeing alone in the dark and called it exactly what it was. Daniel reached over and took my hand while I was talking, and he didn't let go. And when the officer asked if he wanted to add anything, my husband said in front of me, "My mother did this. Whatever needs to happen, we're doing it together." That was Thursday. The Thursday she'd planned to spend turning him against me, he spent choosing me out loud in a room full of strangers. What came after? The confrontation with Carol, what she said when the truth finally met her face, and the strange, quiet way it all landed once the locks were changed and the house was ours again. That's the part I still need to tell you. Because getting the truth believed was only half of it. The other half was learning how to live in a home you have to take back. We changed the locks on a Saturday. Daniel drove to the hardware store and came back with a bag of new deadbolts and a little drill, and we did it together. Every door, the front and the back, and the side door off the garage that we barely used, but that she had a key to anyway. I held the new locks while he worked, and he'd hand me the old ones. And one by one, I dropped them into a paper bag on the porch step. It was such a small thing. A man on a stepladder with a drill on an ordinary weekend. But when the last one clicked into place and he handed me the last brass key, the one that only opened our door, the one only we would ever have. I stood in my own doorway and cried the way you cry when something finally stops hurting. It wasn't clean after that, and I won't pretend it was. The thing with Carol went where those things go, and there were consequences. And there were phone calls from family who'd only heard her side and wanted to know how I could do that to a mother. I let them think what they needed to think. I was done explaining myself to people who'd never had a stranger's key turning in their door at 1 in the afternoon. Daniel handled his mother himself, quietly and completely, and whatever was said between them was his to carry, and he carried it. What I know is that he never once, not one single time after that Wednesday night, asked me to make it smaller than it was. Here's what I understand now that I didn't understand before any of it. I spent 6 years so grateful for a mother that I never noticed I'd been handing pieces of my own life away. A key here, a Sunday call there, a wedding I let become somebody else's. I thought that was what love looked like. I thought being family meant the doors between us should always be open. And what all of this taught me, the hard way, in the dark, is that a marriage doesn't really become yours until the two of you are willing to protect it. Even from the people you love, even from the people who once held your hand in a hospital. Blood doesn't buy anyone a key to the inside of what two people build. That's not coldness. That's the whole quiet work of being grown. Daniel and I are okay. Better than okay, in a way I couldn't have predicted. Because you don't survive something like that as a couple without knowing, all the way down, that the other person will choose you when it costs them everything. I found that out in a room with fluorescent lights, and I'll never forget it. Sometimes I still keep my mother's mugs facing out on the second shelf, handles all the same way, and now when I straighten one, I do it because I want to, because it's my kitchen, in my house, and the little things get to agree with each other because I say so. So that's the whole story. The honest way. Nothing left out. I'm Natalie, and thank you for sitting with me through it. If you made it this far, you're the kind of person I hoped would hear it. There's another story I've been turning over, one I haven't told anyone yet, about a woman who did everything right for the people she loved and still found herself sitting outside her own life looking in, wondering how she got locked out of a family she'd given everything to. I think some of you already know that feeling in your bones. Stay close. I'll tell you that one soon.